Very good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Nikhil Vaswani, and I'm a junior consultant at Turner & Townsend. And today we're kindly joined by Bhavik Daya, senior consultant at Turner & Townsend. This is a retrofit information support and expertise event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero, and delivered by Turner & Townsend. The format of the event will be a relatively short presentation, followed by plenty of chances to engage in a Q&A session with Bhavik. The event will be an hour long and we will finish on time. May I please request that you keep your microphones muted and cameras switched off during the presentation. The slide deck shared on screen today will be made available to all attendees in a follow-up email. Similarly, there will also be a clean recording of this and all other masterclasses in the resources section of the RAISE website. I will shortly provide a series of useful links in the chat function. May I also request that any questions be posted in the chat function as we go along, or alternatively, should you prefer, you may come on screen to ask a question directly after the presentation. Finally, there will be a quick word cloud and poll at the end of the session. Could you please complete these to help us understand the level of knowledge in our topics? And with that, I'd like to thank everyone once again for joining, and I will now hand over to Bhavik for today's presentation on solar. Over to you, Bhavik. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Nikhil. As was mentioned, I'm Bhavik Daya, senior consultant here at Turner & Townsend. And I'll be delivering the session today for you, which is around solar, so an overview of the options for your home, or the homes that you would be treating. So the agenda for today is basically an introduction to the solar options that exist for properties, then looking at what solar thermal is, a bit of a background on that, solar voltaic, which is what we predominantly know as solar PV as well, then the added benefits of solar PV, post-fit advice and support, so what to do after the fact, and then any other options that exist around solar PV as well. So just a touch point on the Warm Homes grant and what it's about. So as you may have heard, there's an ambition for the Warm Homes plan to upgrade 5 million homes across the UK. So that is a very ambitious target. It also aligns with the performance objectives that aspire to reach at least EPC C within all homes. And that goes towards various targets. So yeah, ultimately aligns with net zero for the UK by 2050 and a progress towards alleviating fuel poverty, especially by 2030. The schemes, which are the local grant and the Warm Homes Social Housing Fund, are targeted at low-income households and social homes, and are government-funded schemes, which are delivered by either local authorities, combined authorities, registered housing providers, social housing landlords, as well as registered charities. And the properties that are eligible for these schemes are those that fall under the EPC ratings of D to G, and ultimately it's supporting the delivery of energy performance upgrades and transition to low carbon heating. So moving on to the introduction to solar options for your homes. So as mentioned, there are two common themes when it comes to solar. The one that we most commonly know, which is solar PV, and then solar thermal, which is not as well known, but is also a very valuable way of harnessing the solar energy that we have. So solar thermal is around just heating water or heating other liquids to then heat water through solar. So it's basically the process of absorbing the infrared rays from the sun to heat water. This water is then pumped through a coil within a hot water tank that can either be stored it can either be located where these solar tubes are, or it can be located elsewhere and pumped through. So then you get hot water in the tank. The water can be also used for wet underfloor heating systems or other wet systems, but obviously in a larger wet system, you would need a lot more water. As such, it can be used as a backup for boiler systems or to preheat the water that goes into those type of heating systems. So you then use less electricity or gas, if that's the case, to get the water heated to the required level for the heating system. The other option that we generally are quite well aware of is solar PV, or what's generally always referred to as solar power. So these are the photovoltaic cells, which would be located on your building, and they create electricity for your home or the building, and as such can reduce the amount of energy that you need to procure from an energy supplier. Can also be stored within a battery to be used later or when there is no solar irradiation, and it can benefit residents in a variety of ways. So just looking at solar panels and creation, so the amount of energy created varies throughout the year, and that's quite well known to us because that's based on the amount of solar radiation that you will get. So as we can clearly see that as we go into the summer months, May through to September, you get a peak in terms of energy created, and we're just using a scale of 0 to 3 to kind of give you an indication. And then when you come to the winter months, January, December, so on, the creation is significantly lower, but it's valuable to note that the creation is not zero. So there is sunshine that you will get within the winter months, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% sunny for solar energy to be generated. Then we can also see the time of day. So this differs for winter and summer, obviously depending on the height of the sun and so on. But yeah, the amount of energy generated varies between the day. So depending on the orientation of your building, it's quite valuable to understand how much of sunshine you get on particular elements of the building and where it's best to then locate solar panels with regard. Looking at solar thermal a little bit more. Oh yes, solar systems used for creating hot water in your home. So as mentioned, these are generally tubes that sit on the rooftop. The heat carrier within this is a liquid that's pumped through these panels. It's usually some sort of glycol-based solution so that it doesn't freeze. And it is subsequently warmed by the sun and then pumped through the hot water tank, and then the heat that's within this liquid is then transferred to the water in the tank, and that process just carries on to heat the water as much as possible. And this is something that can also work all year round. What you will get out of it will vary depending on the time of year. The limitations that exist, or the pros and cons rather. So it can be cheaper than PV for initial setup. So the cost associated with installing solar thermal is a lot less. They are highly efficient, and there's a lot of work that's been done in recent years to improve what solar thermal does, especially because it's very common in other more temperate parts of the world. So there has been a lot of work done on it. So they're highly efficient and don't require as much space as solar PV, and can be used with existing heating systems. So top up to your existing hot water solutions. The cons, they do require more maintenance than solar PV because there's liquids that are going through it. There could be instances where leaks occur, The solutions maybe need to be changed at points. You do need a hot water tank to accompany this for storage. So that is something that takes up space, and depending on the situation in the home, it might not be the easiest thing to get around. And then obviously it only heats hot water during the day. The storage in this instance is the storage that occurs by heating the water and the hot water being retained. And that will then depend on how well insulated the storage tank is to determine how long that water will stay hot. And then you would have a backup solution of either electricity, or ideally electricity, or gas in the worst instance, to then heat that water up again to the level required. So just a quick view of thermal storage and heating. So we can see here in the diagram, you've got your solar tubes that would be roof mounted, and there's the liquid that flows through it, gets heated, then goes into your hot water tanks and goes through a coil, and in this regard heats the water that's within it, and then can feed your radiators or go through an alternate secondary heating to get heated, and then all cold water is returned and it goes through the process over and over again. And you also will have your incoming water supply as water gets depleted if you're using it for consumption-based activities such as showering or basins and so on. So yeah, as mentioned, you can receive heat through a variety of sources. So solar thermal, the SOS heat pump, or backup fire boiler. So all of those could be providing heat into the system, and then that gets pushed out to whatever you need it for. Moving on to solar PV. So these are looking at home-based solar solutions. So what we can see here is you'll have your solar panels on the roof, which then feeds into your inverter, which will be located inside your property, or sometimes it could be within a panel. That goes through a meter, so you just understand where the electricity is coming from, or how much you are actually generating. And then that can be used within the home for your appliances and so on. And if there is any additional power generated, you could export that to the grid. Or there's the option where you would have battery storage, so you could still then store whatever's generated and is not used and use it at a later point. And in the event that whatever's generated and stored is still additional, or the battery storage has reached capacity and there's no need for use in the building at the time, that can then still be exported to the grid. So yeah, just looking at solar panels and the options that exist. So the options available for solar roof mounted panels are generally bolt-on, which is the common thing that's being used. And this is easy to retrofit to current homes. So it's just a rack system that's placed onto the roof, and then the panels are installed upon those. What you do then tend to find sometimes is birds nesting or bird netting that needs to be installed to prevent birds from nesting in the panels. So that's one thing to consider. And then you also get integrated panels. So this is an option that you can look at if the roof needs replacing. So these can be integrated into the roof. They will be level with the tiles. It has a cost benefit that you then need less tiles in that instance. But it's something to be looked into, especially when it comes to conservation areas. Sometimes it can help within those aspects. Conservation officers are more likely to approve integrated panels versus bolt-on, as they sit better with the properties. But then there's also requirements to make sure that whatever panels are being used match to the aesthetic required. And that could bring on lead times. So that's something important to understand up front. Have the discussions with conservation officers in your area if this is something that you're looking to do, to understand what type of solar panels are suitable and if you're able to then procure those. A really important aspect with solar panels is south-facing is obviously predominantly where you want to be. That's where you'd get the most sunshine. You could also look at the east and west scenarios, as we looked at earlier, depending on the time of day and where you have more favorable sunshine, and if there's an instance of anything blocking the sunshine. There are softwares available for exploring suitable homes, and there will be more information provided on those. But yeah, there's various software solutions that you could use, or you could even just have a look on Google Maps with the satellite view on to understand which direction properties are facing, how much of sunshine they get, and if that's going to make it a suitable solution. Shared occupancy roofs, so flats, masonettes. There's systems like SolShare that equitably share the solar from one roof across multiple properties. So if that's something that you need to look at, there are solutions for that. And it's something that you can look at. And then in terms of the various sizing of the installations, whether it's below 3.6 or above, you would either need to inform your district network operator about connecting. So where it's a G98, so below the 3.6, you can generally connect and just inform the DNO. Whereas if it's above that size, so the G99, you need the DNO permission before work starts, and this may be subject to charges. So that's quite important to note in terms of how you go about that. Inverters, the need for an inverter is to take the energy created by the solar and make it suitable for use in the home. There's certain questions and things that need to be considered when it comes to inverters. So where's the inverter going to be? It needs to have space around it to dissipate heat. It could be done in such a way that the dissipated heat is used in the property for heating, or in a way, and it's not totally lost. The positioning also then relates to string inverters or micro inverters. So string inverters, all the panels that are on the roof would be wired together, and then this goes into a single inverter. Or you get micro inverters that, as was mentioned earlier, where each panel has its own inverter. This is good if a panel or inverter stops working. The rest can operate with no real issues. But this obviously does add a lot of cost to the scheme. So something that would need to be looked at quite closely. In terms of fire risk assessment and just general risks around this, you need to note, like, can children reach or access the inverter? This could be quite a problem, so that's something to be quite wary of. We would need a new fire risk assessment to just understand where this is located and if it does have any implications. There's not much service required, but it's just a case of checking that they're still working. And typically inverters have a lifespan of around 10 years compared to the actual solar PV panels, which are generally around 25 years plus. So there is the instance that the inverter would need to be replaced in the life cycle of the solar installation, and it's something that needs to be considered in your maintenance strategy. In terms of meters, so these are separate from the main energy meter for the home. However, it's beneficial to get the main energy meter upgraded to a smart meter, so that there's no issues of payment meters not being able to distinguish between import and export and charging for both. So it's quite important to go down that route. Again, where are these going to go? They need to be accessible but not intrusive. Is it in a location where children can turn them off by accident easily, or anything of that sort? So that's something that needs to be looked into. Independence of the grid. So solar PV relies on grid connections to work. So in the case of a power cut, it closes down the system safely for workers on the power lines. So that's also important to note, that it's connected the way that it needs to be, and can be set up independently of the grid as well, for in the case of power cuts. It is beneficial to have solar PV in areas where there is a high risk of power cuts, alongside battery storage, especially where there is a resident which maybe has a medical condition that requires access to constant power. So this is a good solution to have, especially when you're considering the battery storage element. So smart export guarantee, that's something that's changing all the time, but yes, you get paid for exporting electricity to the grid. So that's something that has beneficial elements to it. Without an export meter, you don't have the option to then supply your unused electricity to the solar grid. The pros to having export meters: it's generally easy to set up. You may need DNO permission, but the cons to it does remove the option for the residents to benefit from the unused energy. So in terms of export meters, generally the residents could get the export income. So the pros for this is that it supports the resident to benefit. On the other side, it can be difficult for a housing association to support this, and resident has to close the contract upon leaving the home, which could then have other issues. In terms of a housing association getting the export income, the pros is that the housing association gets a small income, and then there's no risk associated when a resident leaves in terms of needing to close the contract. The cons are obviously that it removes benefits for the residents in that sense, and accessing the meter is also quite difficult, as it will be in the property. Added benefits of solar PV. So as we've spoken about, battery storage can be fitted in homes, ideally located near where the inverter is, if there's enough space. Past standards suggest that inverters and batteries shouldn't be fitted into a loft. Obviously, this is fire risk, and it's in a place where you wouldn't have sight of it constantly, and it could be difficult to access in the event of fire. Battery storage can be used without solar PV, so charged overnight at cheap rates. There are many instances of that occurring at the moment from various energy suppliers, where the off-peak tariffs are really good. So if you do have battery storage, you just charge it at that low rate, and then you're able to use that at another time. These battery units can be very heavy, so that needs to be taken into account, especially if it's going to be located onto a wall. Can that wall support it? Do you need some insight from structural engineers and so on in terms of the loads? Again, on battery storage, just a graph highlighting throughout the day the energy created, which we can see by the pink line here. So that's what the system would have generated during the day, while you have the energy use shown by the yellow line. So everything hatched over here is not being used at the time and can go into the battery storage, which we then see an increase in what's captured within the battery. And when there's no energy created, the shortfall is then comes from battery use. So yeah, the green just shows the battery being filled, and the yellow shows the battery just charging. Solar diverters. So this directs unused solar energy to an immersion heater in the hot water tank. So it reduces energy consumption for heating hot water. So this can be also very useful, and can be used alongside other hot water heating. So can be used in conjunction with solar thermal. But yeah, as noted, this measure requires a hot water tank, so it's not something that can be used in conjunction with instantaneous water heating. There needs to be a water storage tank that allows water to be heated over time. Post-fit advice and support. So what exists on that side? So yeah, there's just the behavior change element that needs to be considered. So the difference between creation and use is the energy created, and then you have what's being used. So it's just understanding where the shortfalls occur. Is the system designed to cater for the full load, or how much can be catered for, and understanding what the shortfall means. Then if you have battery storage, is it a case that you can have a bit of a change in when electricity is used? So for instance, you try and use the washing machine and dishwasher when there's a lot of generation during the day, where you wouldn't be using energy otherwise, and your battery is still being charged, or your batteries are already full. So just to maximize on, call it, the free energy that you're receiving from solar throughout the day. And there's a lot of behavior change elements that need to go into this, for people just understanding, oh, let me keep monitoring my meter to see how much I'm generating. Is my battery full, but I'm still generating? Let me use the power while I can, and so on. Other options for solar PV. So yeah, there's like garden and open space mounted solar. So if the roof is not suitable, then there may be green space available for ground mounted solar. This is useful in communal blocks where there's green space around the building. Obviously, you can't or wouldn't want to be infringing on green space that is used for used by the residents, and has benefits in that sense. So there's a lot to consider in terms of the green space that is being utilized for solar PV. Garages and car mounted or carport mounted. This is something that we're starting to see a little bit more of, and there is a big call for it. Obviously, it's a very different situation when it comes to housing associations, where there might not be as much parking that's centralized, versus, call it, like a large grocery store that has large parking. But we do have parking and are able to install carports, because the the orientation and the location of those spaces is suitable to receive a lot of sunlight, then it might be really valuable to install carports with solar mounted on them. And then solar farms. So this is income for a housing provider, or an opportunity to create large amounts of energy for sale to or for residents. Can be done as part of a community energy partnership. So just a partnership between residents, maybe the local council, housing association, maybe some businesses in the area. There are various avenues to be explored on this side. And yeah, there's a lot of evidence of solar PV being put out on large fields, and the livestock that are there can live quite happily with this being installed. And there's obviously a lot of work that gets done by various environmentalists and so on to make sure that when this installation happens, it doesn't infringe on the nature that's with it. So yeah, that's the other options that exist for solar PV. That brings us pretty much to the end of the overall presentation. We'll go into a bit of a Q&A session now. But for those who may not have gone through this process already, there's a RISE self-assessment. So that's the retrofit support that's offered by Turner and Townsend and funded by the department at no cost to housing associations, local authorities, councils, etc. But the first step is to undertake the self-assessment, and I'm sure Mikhail has probably shared the link for that, or it will be shared. So yeah, it just then helps us to identify how developed your project is and what support you may need in the process.
That's right, Bhavik. And I have shared that link to the RISE self-assessment, and I'm shortly going to be sharing a poll, which I'd appreciate if everyone could take a moment to answer, as it helps us understand the level of knowledge across our topics. I'd also like to take the chance to thank you very much, Bhavik, for such an insightful presentation on solar. Clearly an important part of any organization's retrofit journey.